This podcast was recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Hello and welcome to The Real Story with Joe Hildebrand. I am A, Joe Hildebrand, B, someone who is exactly as handsome and wise as Joe Hildebrand, or C, all of the above and a bit schizophrenic. Yes, that is right. We have an absolutely huge show for you. Is Donald Trump snubbing Anthony Albanese because he doesn't like Kevin Rudd? Ooh. It's a menage a trois of hatred. Speaking of hatred, how Glastonbury became the music festival of death. What is going on? And just as an added bonus, we're going to deliver peace in the Middle East. All that and more coming up. So first up this week, there was a report by some of my beloved colleagues at Sky News about Donald Trump refusing to meet with Anthony Albanese, our Prime Minister, because he doesn't like Kevin Rudd. And quite frankly, he wouldn't be the first. But let's just unpack this a bit. So a former pollster for Trump, a Republican pollster called Brett Buchanan, told Sky News that Mr. Rudd's role as Australia's representative was a key reason Mr. Albanese had been unable to schedule a face-to-face meeting with the US president. And look, let's face it, Kevin Rudd does have a way of putting people offside. He put all of China offside by saying they were trying to rat us on climate change. Was he wrong? Probably not. But anyway, there are some things you're sort of not meant to say, including most of what Kevin Rudd said on Twitter after he was no longer the Prime Minister, and he said that Donald Trump was this kind of terrible threat to democracy, awful person. And plenty of people have said plenty of bad things about Donald Trump in the past. He's not alone there either. Then, of course, Kevin Rudd gets made ambassador to the US while Joe Biden is the president, and everyone thinks that Biden is going to win again and that Trump is dead in the water. Unfortunately, history did not follow the script that had been ordained to it, and Trump ends up beating Kamala Harris, and suddenly all of Kevin Rudd's tweets come back to haunt him. Or did they? Because I'm not entirely convinced that Donald Trump, A, knows, or B, cares, or C, isn't willing to forgive the things that Kevin Rudd has previously said about him. Now, we know that Donald Trump, despite being a bit bombastic and never afraid to lay into his enemies in all sorts of public fora, I can't believe I used the correct Latin plural for forum. That's a classical education for you, huh? Not bad for a boy from Dandenong. Anyway, so Trump has been known to bring his enemies into his fold. One example is his vice president, J.D. Vance, who was slagging off Trump during his first term and is now the VP, now the bloke that's going to replace Trump if the president has a heart attack and dies on the job. Even the host of Morning Joe, Joe Scarborough, who's basically Joe Biden's press secretary on air, gets invited to Mar-a-Lago to have a bit of a tete-a-tete with Trump and, find out where it all went wrong for him and what part of middle America Joe Scarborough and other mainstream coast outlets simply weren't getting. So there's that. The other thing that is not quite, fitting with the narrative that Trump is refusing to meet with Albo just because he really, really, really hates Rudd is that Trump's first meeting with Albo, albeit over the telephone, but a proper official scheduled telephone hookup between the Oval Office and a secure room in Parliament House or the Lodge or wherever it was, between the two leaders, that was set up by Rudd. That was set up by the US Embassy, Australia's US Embassy in Washington, that is run by Kevin Rudd. He set up that phone call. And that phone call was something that takes, weeks of planning. Again, unlike people who say, oh, why didn't, Donald Trump just call you? Or why didn't you just text Donald Trump? In fact, if you're going to have a phone call with the US president, it's a bit more complicated than that. You have to have a secure line, and both leaders have to be in a secure room. There's obviously all sorts of protocols over who can be in the room with them, who is actually listening, who can hear these things. It's not something you just sort of, fire off, just because you feel like it, like, me back in the day at the pub to all my ex-girlfriends. It's more, I won't say more congenial, but it's more formal than that. So if Donald Trump didn't want to talk to Albo, or doesn't want to talk to Albo because he hates Kevin Rudd, why did he agree to the phone call that was set up by Kevin Rudd so he could talk to Albo? This, of course, brings us to the G7 meeting in Canada, world powerhouse Canada. And people say, well, hang on, why didn't he speak to Albo at the G7 meeting like he was supposed to? And Albo flew literally across the world, like literally the other side of the world. It is a very, very long way to go not to get a meeting. But of course they were going to have a meeting. They had a meeting scheduled, but Trump had to go and deal with the Middle East peace crisis. And so he left the G7, left all the people he was going to have meetings with so he could deal with Israel and Iran bombing the bejesus out of each other. And of course, as we later found out, so that the US could basically finish the job by dropping a few bunker-busting bombs on Iran itself. So again, if we had to follow that logic, did Trump orchestrate war in the Middle East just so he could get out of meeting Albo because he didn't like Kevin Rudd's mean tweets? Possibly. I mean, it's Donald Trump, who knows? But I just don't think so. And, of course, people say, well, he met with Keir Starmer, who is the other member of AUKUS, the UK Prime Minister, clues in the name, AUKUS. We're the A, by the way, in case anyone's wondering. He meets with Keir Starmer, but didn't meet with Albo. Well, the meeting with Keir Starmer was the day before that Trump left. And the reason why that meeting was before, and this is another criticism, but Albo was only meeting Donald Trump on the sidelines. It wasn't like an official G7 meeting. It's like, that's right, because Australia's not in the G7. The G7 doesn't include Australia. We're not there. Australia was there as a special kind of gift, if you like, special offer, one time, end of financial year sale, at the invite of Canada. So Canada invites Australia as a special guest to the G7, even though it's not in the G7. And this is completely normal. This is what happens. The largest country in the world, India, an absolute nuclear superpower with 1.5 billion people. Guess what? It's not in the G7 either. Like, Anthony Albanese was sitting at the kids' table at the G7 dinner with India. Meanwhile, the real powerhouses of the world were sitting at the G7 table. Powerhouses like Italy and Canada. Surprised New Zealand wasn't there. But this is the thing. G7 is a sort of arbitrary grouping of nations, European and North American nations, who all got together, and there's nothing binding about it. It's basically just a chance for a big global talk fest so that people can have these bilateral meetings on the sidelines. And it just so happened that Albo just copped the day that Donald Trump had to go and deal with Israel bombing Iran and Iran firing missiles at Israel. And again, if Donald Trump, that's a bit more than I'm washing my hair that night. Oh, sorry, something's just come out. Oh, I've got a calendar clash. There's war in the Middle East. So I'm just not entirely sure that Kevin Rudd being mean about Donald Trump in since deleted tweets is the reason why Anthony Albanese hasn't been able to get a face-to-face meeting with the US president, a meeting that was scheduled and was about to take place again when World War III was about to break out, but didn't, as we're going to find out later in the show. So why is this Republican pollster saying that the reason why Donald Trump didn't meet Albo is because he hates Kevin Rudd? Maybe because he reads the news. Maybe because that's what a whole bunch of other people are saying is the reason. And so when he's asked what the reason is, he gives the reason to the best of his knowledge. Just a thought. That's where reading the news will get you anyway. I'll tell you something else that's in the news. Glastonbury. Yes, the Glastonbury Music Festival, that great celebration of peace and love and harmony, the literal harmony and the metaphorical kind of us all living together in one common cause, working with each other, respecting each other, protecting each other, and of course, not killing each other, which is kind of like the entry level for peace and love. Again, we'll talk about that with our special guest this week, how, just not killing someone is enough. That's all you really have to do for peace, just not kill people or not say that people should be killed. And that's kind of the vibe. That's the peace train that Cat Stevens was talking about shortly before he called for a fatwa on Simon Rushdie. But anyway, look, I'm going a bit off piece. So Glastonbury Music Festival, as everyone in the world knows right now, turned into this massive, seething hotbed of hate because a couple of acts said some pretty nasty things about Israel, and one act in particular said that Israeli soldiers should be killed, or at the very least, wished them dead. So let's just take a back step. How did we get to this? How did Glastonbury, which has since put out a statement saying, oh no, we don't mean any of this. This is terrible. We condemn these comments. We're all about peace and love. We never knew this would happen. Nobody could know this would happen. Well, Glastonbury, you kind of could have known it was happening, because one of the acts in question was actually up on a terror charge a month before you had them perform as a headline act at your festival. Now, this is an Irish rap group from Belfast called Kneecap, and they are totally hardcore. You can tell by the name, Kneecap. Kneecapping, of course, is what the IRA used to famously do to anyone that it thought was an informant. It would kneecap them, which is take a gun and blow their kneecaps off. Pretty painful, apparently. Interesting fun fact, I was told once many years ago that the best knee reconstruction surgeons in the whole world were in Ireland and Victoria, because the worst possible injuries you could get on your knees were from being kneecapped by the IRA or playing AFL. Never bothered to confirm it. They didn't have the internet back then, but I assume that's true. That just makes sense. It feels right. Anyway, so hardcore Irish language rap group Kneecap, totally hardcore. And they've got a history of saying, really provocative, hard left, hardcore kneecappy things. Like, for example, kill your local Tory MP. The only good Tory is a dead Tory, so kill your local Tory MP. Don't get much hardcore than that. It's inciting murder. You ain't going to kill people because they're right wing, because they're Tories. Kill the Tories. So hardcore. Funny thing was that when actually confronted with that, because people in the UK were actually killing MPs were actually being killed. And I said, Kneecap, should you really be saying all this stuff when MPs are actually, oh, no, we didn't mean that. That's not really true. Oh, sorry. Oh, no, that was just us. That was just putting it on. That was just a part of our persona. That was just part of our act. Oh, right, okay. Anyway, fast forward to November 2024, a year and a bit after the October 7 terror attacks, at another music festival, the Nova Music Festival in southern Israel, where hundreds of people were killed, slaughtered, blown up, massacred, whatever you want to call it. Not just killed, though, also raped, also kidnapped, young people at a music festival celebrating peace. The music festival was actually dedicated to peace, like all music festivals are, from Woodstock on. Just like Glastonbury, it's all about peace, isn't it? And Hamas comes in and kills, murders, maims, kidnaps, rapes. About three or 400 of those little peaceniks celebrating peace at a peaceful music festival. And so what does Kneecap do at another music festival about a year later? One of their members chants, "Up Hamas! Up Hezbollah!" and then drapes himself in the Hezbollah flag. So a year after Hamas has killed hundreds of music festival goers, the Kneecap then rocks up at another music festival and says that they support Hamas and support Hezbollah and they one of them covers themselves with the Hezbollah flag. That's a bit low. That's a bit harsh, isn't it? I mean, you've said go kill Tories. Now you're saying that you support terrorists who killed festival goers while you're at a festival with festival goers. Okay. So what happens then is that Kneecap gets charged. So in May, Kneecap gets charged, or this member of Kneecap, Mo, I believe their name is. Anyway, they get charged with supporting a prescribed terrorist organisation because, of course, Hamas and Hezbollah are illegal terrorist organisations under UK law, just as they are under Australian law. And to support them, to voice support for them, to promote support for them, champion their cause by saying things like, I don't know, up Hamas, up Hezbollah, that's an offence. That's supporting terrorism. And so the police have charged this person and charged them in May. Now, you can sort of say what you like about free speech or whether people should be charged for just saying stupid stuff, extremist stuff. I think once you're actually inciting violence, obviously that's a big red line. But the point is that there is no one, I was going to say there's no one on the planet. Let's just take it back a bit. There is no one in the UK music scene who did not know that this guy was charged with supporting terrorism. And yet the Glastonbury organisers who support peace, love and mung beans and had no idea that these acts would say such outrageous things, they still put Kneecap on the bill as one of their big names, one of the big artists. And it was so known that these guys were at best questionable, and this is all allegedly because he's now been charged, so, you know, despite the fact there were thousands of witnesses, you know, allegedly. But this guy was charged by police. He actually comes out on stage bragging about the fact that he's on bail. He goes, Glastonbury, I'm a free man. That's my Northern Irish accent for you. So the idea that Glastonbury was sort of blindsided by this, and the organisers who, they're not about just making money, by the way. They're not about just creating a bit of controversy or creating a bit of a buzz so they can rake in $800 Australian for a general admission ticket from each of the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, in fact, people who move through. It's not about money at all. It's about peace. It's about bringing people together. So the idea they were blindsided by this is absolute bollocks. And it's even more bollocks by the fact that the BBC, which live streams Glastonbury, deliberately cut the feed before Kneecap came on because they knew that Kneecap was probably going to say something horrifically incendiary, offensive, possibly inciting, whatever. So the BBC, Glastonbury's broadcast partner, knew that these guys were dodgy, were questionable at best, and that one of them had been charged with support for terror, and that the BBC would be in all sorts if it broadcast that support for terrorism. What the BBC didn't know or didn't anticipate was that Kneecap had a warm-up act. And Kneecap had a warm-up act called Bob Villain. Get it? It's like Bob Dylan, but bad, because everyone's really badass. These performers, they're so badass. They're like badass hardcore musicians. And Bob Villain is not a person. It is two people. It is a duo comprised of Bobby Villain with a Y in the Bobby and Bobby Villain with an IE in the Bobby, which are both, spoiler alert, assumed names. They're both cover names, stage names, because apparently these guys are so edgy. They can't actually reveal their real names because what they're saying is so edgy and so for real and so hardcore that if anyone knew their real names, it'd just blow their mind or whatever. Or maybe they just have to face real-world consequences, which has indeed happened. So Bobby Villain, Bobby with a Y Villain, I think, gets up on stage. And I have to say, it looks like a phenomenal performance, by the way. This guy's very athletic. But, you know, also has possibly incited murder. Anyway, he gets up on stage, he says, free, free Palestine. And, of course, everyone goes, free, free Palestine. Glastonbury are selling Palestinian flags for £10 a pop. They are actually selling. So the cool thing to be at a music festival and do now. Remember the big day out and everyone said, how dare you drape yourself in the Australian flag? That's a hate crime. That means you're a racist. And there was all that, you know, I feel really uncomfortable, people having Australian flags at the big day out. And This festival's here. Here at Glastonbury, they are selling Palestinian flags. So again, not about the money, but it just so happens they are selling them because they're the must-have accessory for 2025, Glasso. So this guy comes out and says, free Palestine. So whatever, fair enough, cool. Who doesn't want to be free? And then says, death to the IDF. And that's, of course, the Australian Defence Forces. So this is, again, there's always a line in argument. I'm all in for free speech, but there's always a line where free speech does not mean incitement to violence. So you can't say, hey, you should go and kill that Jew over there and say, hey, it's just free speech. It's just my opinion that you should go and do it. Nah, that doesn't work. The old saying goes, free speech does not mean shouting fire in a crowded theatre. So if you're doing something that you know is obviously going to cause harm or danger, cause people to be injured or hurt or even worse, killed, that's not a free speech argument. That's just you being a dick and quite possibly a criminal. And so this guy says death to the IDF and tries to get everyone to, chant along with him, which of course they effortlessly do because they've bought their Palestine flags for £10. So you want to get your money's worth, and away they go. And the uproar obviously has just been enormous, and people are going filthy. The cops are now investigating this guy as well, and of course the UK police they've got ridiculous hate speech laws there, and they may well be warranted in this case, but they're arresting people for tweets and Facebook posts and everything. So of course they're investigating this, and we'll see what happens. And then Bobby Villain responds to all this by posting a picture of himself on social media eating an ice cream. So basically saying, while all the Zionists are out there hating on me or losing their minds or whatever, I'm eating and then this is the amazing thing, puts in brackets, vegan, close brackets, ice cream. So he's not just so right on about Palestine that he wants the Israeli Defence Forces personnel to die, but he just wants to ensure that everyone knows that he's a vegan and that it's vegan ice cream because, of course, harming animals, that's inhumane. And that's the really kind of galling thing about all of this. People can have their views on, what's going on in the Middle East and whose side they're on and who's the terrorist and who's the genocidal evil state, whatever. But it's all fake with these guys. It's actually nothing to do with Palestine. Does this person really think that he's helping the Palestinian people, the Palestinian cause by saying death to the IDF and getting everyone to chant along? I mean, if anything, he's creating, if you think about it, two brain cells, he's creating a massive backlash to that cause. And at any rate, these people say, we need to raise awareness. Why aren't people talking about this? Everyone's talking about it, dickhead. The whole world's talking about it. They're talking about virtually nothing else. So everyone knows about it. Everyone knows which side, which people are on. Awareness is not a problem with this issue, I assure you. But again, they don't really care about the issue. They don't care about the suffering of the Palestinian people. They care about telling people how right on they are, how virtuous they are, how much they care, how engaged they are, how hardcore they are, and in case of Bobby Villain, how vegan they are. And how do we know this? Well, they tell us themselves. The old joke, how do you know if someone's a vegan? They'll tell you. Bobby Villain just told us. He just told us. And to our old friends, Kneecap, they told us too. Because when they were confronted on their extreme language, be it covering themselves in the Hezbollah flag, saying up Hamas, up Hezbollah, or saying go and kill your Tory MP, they say, oh, no. We don't really mean it. It's just an act. It's just part of our persona. Don't you get that? Dumb Philistine. Don't understand. I'm a performer. I'm an artist. But they're actually telling us this. They don't actually care that much. They're just saying it as part of an act. And that's the same thing with so much of online activism, public activism, all these people who are shouting, jumping on any cause. That's how these people end up, holding protests in support of the Ayatollah of Iran. It's just an act. It's just a show. It's not about the cause. It's not about who's right or wrong or who's suffering. It's all about you, so you can show off just how right on you are. And of course, in this case, you're totally wrong. Well, as we're very fond of saying here at the Real Story podcast, it's World War III again, again, again. And strangely, World War III never seems to materialise. Doesn't quite eventuate the way so many people seem to say it's about to. And my next guest is a very sage observer of this phenomenon. He just wrote a fantastic piece in the Oz talking about how so many commentators, especially the ones who always think they know better than everybody else, have got the Middle East wrong and have got their predictions that the Iran-Israel conflict would lead to this broader regional conflagration and possibly drag in all the superpowers and be the end of life as we know it on Earth. His name is Adam Slonim. He is the founder and director of the Middle East Policy Forum and wears a stack of other hats as well that I won't go into. The most important hat, though, is that he's a guest on The Real Story. Adam, welcome. How are you?
Joe, thank you for having me. Great today.
Fantastic. Great to have you. Let's get right into it. You wrote in your piece recently that commentators, and again, I'm comforted because you're an expert in this area and I'm not, but I saw the same thing and thought, how on earth does this turn into a regional war, let alone a global one? And that these predictions were so misguided because people seem to lack a fundamental understanding of the power dynamic in the Middle East, the various interests of all the sort of countervailing forces. Just take us through what I suppose the mistakes that other people were making in seeing this thing explode, and why, in fact, your analysis showed that, you know, Iran-Israel, for example, would be a very self-contained and effective conflict.
Joe, how much time do we have?
30 seconds, go.
Right, okay. The three words there's two sides to this. There's the way we see it and what actually goes on.
Yes.
The way we see it in the West is, and I use three words, fear, fatalism, and faith. Fear that conflict cannot be contained, that conflict and kinetic conflict, war by its very nature, will explode everything around it. That's one of the really core issues here. The other is what we call fatalism, that the intractability of much of the conflict means that it must inherently therefore go on and on and on and spiral. The third is faith, which is the Western lens in which we see conflict, which is that conflict, if it's not mediated, negotiated, and have a process through which compromise can be attained, it therefore leads to disaster. So when we put that frame on the Middle East, we get apocalyptic scenarios. The reality of the Middle East is it's much more nuanced than that. And there is so much going on at the surface and behind it that those lenses, those three Fs, cannot take into account some of those realities which need to be unpacked to get a better understanding that, you know, sometimes, and often wrong, but sometimes correctly, kinetic force, military force, will deliver the outcome.
Yep.
And most of the time it doesn't. But when it does, it's incredibly effective.
One of the things that Trump, I think, is very consciously or unconsciously doing is engaging with, you know, basically madman diplomacy, which is, as of course you would know, and we talk about on this podcast, is a strategy devised by Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon during the Vietnam era, where Kissinger would sort of quietly say, listen, this guy's off the leash. I don't know what he's going to do next. And that would make, you know, the Russians, for example, or the Chinese think, all right, we better just step back here because we don't want this thing to blow up. How much do you think that's a deliberate strategy on the part of Donald Trump, and the fact that he's actually decided for the first time really since his presidency, decided to follow through with one of his sort of bombastic threats and actually drop these bunker busters on Iran? I mean, that seems to have been the kind of circuit breaker in this conflict, doesn't it? And it's classic madman diplomacy. Holy crap, this guy actually will do stuff, we'd better pull our heads in, go back to the negotiating table, agree to the ceasefire, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I truly don't know if President Trump has a strategic bone in his body.
It's hard.
Right?
Yeah.
Seriously, no idea. But I'm going to take you up on the point that this is not the first time where he said, I'll do it, and then done it. So there are a couple of instances here. Number one, it wasn't just the bombing of the nuclear arsenal, which was a threat to world peace.
Yes.
Even our foreign minister has said
Absolutely.
it very clearly,
Yep.
right, that a jihadist, Islamist, apocalyptic.
That's right. Eschatological. Like these guys are literally prepping for the end of the world and want to get an atom bomb. That's not a good mix.
You know, one of the lessons of history, especially of the 20th century, Joe, is if they say they're going to do it, I'll take them at their word.
That's right.
Like, seriously, I'll take them at their word. It's similar in that sense to what Hamas said. Hamas said, we're going to kill you and we're going to do whatever it takes to do it. And then they went and did it.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's the first thing. So he understood that. But let's go back to a couple of things that he did in contradistinction to Obama's very infamous red lines.
Yep.
He said, President Obama said, if Syria used chemical weapons, that was a red line.
Of course.
And there would be a consequence. They used chemical weapons, nothing happened. So the equation then equals no American deterrence. That's what happens. The prestige that comes with deterrence fails. Right. Remember in his first term that Trump did two things in the Middle East that were, or three things that were extremely important. One, he recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Yep.
Which everybody said would be a massive war. There would be conflict. There would be an eschatological disaster. Nothing happened.
Yep.
Two, he then went and assassinated Soleimani, the head of probably the number one, and I'm going to use the word because it is the right word, terrorist in the world, the man who set the whole Iranian agenda and infrastructure for that ring of fire through the Middle East to assert Shiite hegemony. He killed him.
Yep.
Said he would, did it. Third, he then put out the Abraham Accords.
Yes.
Which is, and if this war continues that legacy and the discussions of peace with Syria, and by the way, peace in the Middle East just means the absence of war. It doesn't mean wonder and warmth.
Yeah, that's right. Everyone holding hands and singing Kumbaya.
We've got to be really careful about this, right? But if it means absence of kinetic conflict between Israel and Lebanon, who are desperate to get rid of Hezbollah, and Syria, and then the Saudi Arabians join in, the custodians of the Islamic holy sites. This war, let's look at it as a metaphorical thing. The chrysalis of that conflict, out of it will come something, I think, wonderful.
Yep.
Something amazing. Israel's talent, the Arabian talent and capital, the ability to put all that together in a region that is fundamentally always at the lowest level of UN human development indexes. It's time we went past that and we actually liberated the great strengths and talents and opportunities that come from that region. So Trump has, as we say, Trump has form. So
Yes.
when he said to the Iranians, I'm giving you 60 days just to show you serious. And on the 61st,
Yeah, that's right.
he rang Netanyahu and said, days up, off you go.
Yeah.
They should have realised. They didn't. He said, I'm going to drop the bombs on you. They said, no, you won't. He dropped the bombs, and their nuclear infrastructure, no matter what you read, Joe,
Yep.
is essentially finished. It's gone. It's finished.
That's exactly right. There was that preliminary intelligence report that was strategically leaked from the Pentagon that the head of the CIA subsequently overruled. And yes, you're absolutely right. In his first term, he did that. I was obviously talking about Trump's second term, where he's made previous threats to Hamas, threats to Russia or whatever, and not followed through. Just to take you up on the, what the future of the Middle East looks like now. And again, this is something that I think a lot of people who like to talk a lot but perhaps don't quite understand the situation. I mean, Hamas's attack on October 7 was very, very clearly strategically timed to disrupt negotiations between Israel and Saudi Arabia that would have brought them closer together. Already there was a breakthrough with the Saudis, which is key, of course, to the wider region and the other Gulf states, where Israeli planes for the first time were able to fly over Saudi airspace, for example, thanks to the Abraham Accords. And that was only going to get closer. And of course, Hamas and Iran, being Shiite states, were terrified of Israel's closer alignment with the rest of the Arab states, which are all Sunni, and so they tried to blow that up. So again, people who just instinctively back Iran or Hamas or, so-called Palestine, which is being betrayed by both leaderships, actually fail to realise this is an intra-Muslim conflict as much as it is a conflict between Israel and Palestine. But where do you see, just a quick recap of the entire Middle East peace crisis.
Nicely done.
But where do you see, I mean, I think part of the problem isn't it, that Netanyahu's political survival relies on him staying on as Prime Minister. The only way he can do that is to form ongoing coalitions with increasingly sort of right-wing, ultra-conservative, ultra-orthodox parties. This means that he's very unlikely to reach any kind of ongoing ceasefire with Hamas, particularly while Hamas have the hostages. It's not really in Hamas's interests either, because they're all but obliterated, but they have to hang on as well for their own self-interest. Sure. How does that Gordian knot get cut? Where's the breakthrough, do you think?
Okay, let's let's take all that and start with what's just happening today. Trump has told Bibi, you got to do a deal with Hamas.
Yep.
Right? Do the deal.
Yep.
Now, I've learned from a very, very good friend of mine, a wonderful man named Peter Lerner in Israel, who's the international director of the Labour Federation, the Histadrut. And when he's serving, he's in the IDF, he's a spokesperson. What he's taught me is it doesn't all happen together all at once. Yep. What's the name of that movie? Everything
Everywhere,
all together, all at once. It doesn't have to be. It can be sequentially layered. There can be layers to this. Now, Hamas is never going to release the hostages. The minute they release the hostages, that's their last bargaining chip for staying in power. And they are not just apocalyptic, they're apocalyptic suicidal. And they will stay in power to the last death of every civilian above ground. They don't care about the Gazans. All right. But we need to, knowing that, we need to treat this in sequence. If there is a ceasefire on the ground, some hostages are released, and that's the important thing in all of this, is that we never lose our humanity about what's happened to Israelis and to Palestinians. If there's a ceasefire and Israel's got control of about 70% of Gaza, then we can deal with the issue of the hostages, we can deal with Hamas, and the one thing that Bibi's not dealing with is the day after. What does that look like? Now, he can't deal with that with his current government because of the nature of that government. But he's a great survivor. I'm not sure he believes in anything, like many politicians.
No, I don't think he does either. I think it's just to keep him
like many politicians.
Yep.
It's power. So if the deal is done with the Abraham Accords and they're expanded, as a think putting on our political hats, Joe, and there's a ceasefire in Gaza so people are stopping dying, then you go to election. And if you go to election, and if the centre, if Bennett, who's the previous Prime Minister, comes back to the centre and Bibi would align with him, then Bibi doesn't need the far right.
Yes.
They deserve to belong to the dustbin of history, right? Good, put them there. The ultra-religious will then be on notice. You either come to grips with the modernity of modern Israel or you get cut off, right? Because right now they're being funded to stay apart from the state. So if the centre, and Bibi would probably win with the centre,
Yep.
then we have a different Israel.
And
We
can
have
I just ask?
Different relationship.
I was going to say because the reason why Netanyahu's had to align himself with the ultra-Orthodox and far-right MPs is because the centre refused to form government with him. Do you think that would change if there was a breakthrough in terms of, a ceasefire or the Abraham Accords? Do you think the centre would come to the party and hold their nose and make him Prime Minister again?
I'm not sure. Everyone who talks about Israel or lives in Israel is a prophet. Joe, you and I are not.
No.
However, I speak to friends and family there all the time. The country has not had the chance to, what's the best expression, unpack the trauma of 2 years of conflict. And it needs to breathe. It needs to reassert itself. It needs to come to grips. Even I spoke to my sister who's just spent 2 weeks, in her safe room, and good friends of mine in a bunker. They've come out of it, and the psychological challenges that they're facing just coming back to normal with their families is significant. So the urgency of finding a new normal, I think, in a society that has been literally under bombardment for 2 years, that is Israel and in Gaza, is so remarkable. I think it overrides the ideological framework. And in this sense, Israel is different to what's happening on some of the other borders. In Hamas, the ideological, let's call it like it is, the religious imperative overrides any reason in coming to a modicum with Israel. The war would be finished tomorrow if the hostages are released. That's it. It's the end of it.
Yep.
But it can't happen because for them there's a religious imperative here that they are apocalyptically driven to. But coming back to Israel, the need to find normality is urgent. It's urgent. It's a very challenged society. I've been there. I saw it after October 7. It's got to repair. It's just got to repair itself. So does that mean that the centre and Bibi will do business together? It well could.
Yep.
As I said in my article, he and Trump are Churchillian in what they've done with this war. 12-day war, they've rewritten, by the way, the rules of war, how you do war. It's completely rewritten.
Yep.
More significantly than the 6-day war of 1967. But I'm reminded of what Stanley Baldwin said about Churchill, right, in 1935.
Yep. Love a Stanley Baldwin quote.
Right? They wanted to get rid of Churchill out of the parliament. They wanted him out, right? He does not have a great track record.
No, that's right.
And he turned to them and he said, if there's going to be a war, and there is, he's the only man I want to fight it. Other than that, no issue with you. And that's exactly what's happened here.
Well, on that hopefully positive note, we've managed to successfully negotiate our way through World War III, come out the other side and delivered on a platter peace in the Middle East. Adam Slonim, thank you so much for joining us on The Real Story.
It's been my pleasure and my honour. Thanks, Joe.
And that is all we have time for this week. Of course, you can get on the gram, go to @Joe_Hildebrand and slide into my DMs if you want to suggest any topics, ask any questions. You can email us as well. I think we still have the electronic mail, don't we? Do millennials still use that? That's therealstory@novapodcasts.com.au. You can go to your Apple Podcast app or your Spotify. You can leave us a review. You can leave us a rating. We've got a pretty good rating, I think. We're up there 4.8 or something. Let's go for 4.9 this week, guys. Come on, I know you can do it. And, of course, you can read all my rantings in the Daily Telegraph or other News Corp mastheads every Monday and Saturday. And if that's not enough, we're going to come back next week and do it all over again. See you then.